right, hello. Thank you for being here. I am, of the two, the first one, Vittoria Sipone, and today I will be telling you about the impact of a specific type of information, idiosyncratic facts, on attitudes toward and moral reasoning about animals. So, to understand the broader framework of this study, let's think of an example, the endangerment of dolphins. We might know that habitat destruction and ocean pollution are causing more and more species of dolphins to become endangered, but if we don't care about dolphins or the oceans, we're not likely to engage in any conservation action that might protect them. Similarly, we may know everything about habitat loss and ocean pollution, but if we really don't care about dolphins, we don't really like them, similarly, we might not engage in protective actions. So really, the issue involves drawing a connection between knowledge and attitudes. If we know the threats that are potentially harming dolphins or other animals, and we also care for them, then chances are we are going to be more likely to engage in conservation behaviors or actions to protect them. So with that in mind, we also need to consider all the factors that impact the development of our attitudes and our knowledge of natural species. So our study examines the impact of learning different types of facts on the attitudes and moral reasonings about different types of animals. So, the story so far. The work on environmental attitudes draws heavily from Kellert's research. And his work suggests a developmental trajectory of environmental attitudes that displays the characteristics of being highly personal and then eventually developing into more socially oriented, geographically narrow, and eventually those attitudes broaden to unfamiliar territories. In fact, finally, emotions and affect-based attitudes and values tend to emerge earlier than others that rely on logic and abstract thinking. In particular, to the point of the study, the attitude that we are mostly interested in is the moralistic attitude, which is concerned with caring for nature, valuing nature, and considering transgression against it as morally wrong. The moralistic attitudes is suggested to develop around 12 and 17 years of ages, but work that looks specifically at environmental moral reasoning suggests that actually kids begin to conceptualize nature as a moral entity a lot earlier than that. So extending this idea of a moral attitude, underscoring our tendency to care for nature, Khan and colleagues explored how individuals reason about environmental moral dilemmas. And this was already mentioned a little bit today, but basically two overarching forms of moral reasoning emerge. One is the anthropocentric moral reasoning, which conceptualizes nature as of value in relation to humans, and a biocentric form of moral reasoning, which focuses on the relevance of nature as having rights in and of itself, regardless, at least in part, of its value to humans. Great, but all of this development does not happen in a vacuum. Experiences with the environment play a key factor in influencing the development of our attitudes and moral reasoning. There are a number of ways to know about nature. Some are innate, right? That's what folk biology is concerned with. But to the purpose of the study, we're looking at experiences in nature because research suggests that there are a number of ways in which our attitudes become more positive toward nature after we experience it. Mere exposure to nature is one of them. Engaging in gardening, beekeeping, playing outside and having first-hand experience with nature tends to foster our liking of it. Exposure to conservation messages. There is a number of studies that have been conducted, especially with adults, in zoos and nature-oriented centers that point out how being exposed to, reading a signage, reading a little blurb about nature, animals, and conservation messages does foster not only our knowledge of environmental issues, but also our positive attitudes towards the target of that message. And finally, direct instruction. A lot of the research on the topic focuses on summer camps or environmental educational programs that tend to take anywhere between a couple of hours or less than that, but in a repeated exposure or days. And in those situations, participants are directly given, are directly instructed with information about nature. Now, a couple of things that we don't know is, first of all, the baseline to determine the minimum amount of information that is necessary or that is suggested to improve our positive attitudes. A lot of the environmental programs that I just mentioned, again, cover either repeated meetings between teachers and pupils, or they take a whole day or a couple of days. It's a week-long summer camp. So we really don't know what's the minimum amount of information that can do the trick. The second one is age. A lot of the literature that looks at this type of direct instruction focuses on children from 6, 7 years of age and older. But if we look at any program of any zoo or museum or conservation center, there are programs available for children as young as 3. And finally, we decided to focus on a very specific type of information, which is very present in our daily life: idiosyncratic information. Idiosyncratic information refers to all those novel factual informations that are not available, for example, at a grade school textbook level. So if you do a quick Google search about animal facts, you will get 100 lists about 10 facts about nature that will blow your mind, will amaze you, will change the way you see, I don't know, bats or bees or penguins forever. So this is what we are looking at for a number of reasons. It is schema incongruent. We tend to not associate animals with, for example, dancing, which is one of the fun facts, as we will see that we explored, which means that it's conceptually vivid and emotionally attractive. There's a reason why they are called fun facts. They are emotionally engaging, they are interesting, they are different, and they are pervasive in everyday life. So with those considerations in mind, we are aiming to examine the impact of different types of information, specifically taxonomic facts or idiosyncratic facts on individuals' attitude toward and moral reasoning about animals. And we predicted that idiosyncratic information will lead to more positive attitudes compared to taxonomic information, and also will promote more biocentric reasoning, thus fostering moral reasoning more than taxonomic information. When we talk about taxonomic information, we do talk about this kind of facts that are present at a grade book, at a grade level textbook level. So our participants, we had adults as well as children, 45 adults and 70 children. They were all recruited in a number of ways. Unfortunately, the interviews had to be conducted online, which is, I think, a limitation of this study. But they all participated in virtual interviews that lasted approximately 30 minutes. And each interview consisted of a procedure repeated 4 times. So participants joined us in a virtual interview that focused around 4 target animals: bees, whales, penguins, and rhinos. For each target animals, the procedure looked the same. So we started by showing them a picture of the animal and assessing what they knew about it. And really, this was just to make sure that they actually knew something about all the different species. We then measured their attitudes. How much do you like rhinos, and why? Then we delivered this bit of very short, bite-sized information. Now, for the total of 4 target animals, the order of presentation and pairing of animal and information type was conducted through a controlled randomized procedure, so that each participant who would be exposed to information that was taxonomic for 2 animals and idiosyncratic for 2 other animals. Then we assess their attitudes again. Now that you've learned, now that I've told you about this fact, how much more or less or the same do you like the animal? We then presented an environmental moral dilemma. So we created scenarios in which a skilled worker harmed the target animal for their own benefit across different conditions. And we asked participants to tell us whether they thought the transgression was all right or not, and why. So that's a lot. So here's an example with penguins. For example, knowledge assessment. What do you know about penguins? How much do you like penguins? Taxonomic information regarding penguins would include the fact that they cannot fly, but they swim instead, that they eat crabs and squids, and that there are somewhere between 17 and 20 species, none of penguins. On the other hand, the idiosyncratic information centered around the fact that because penguins live in really cold climates, they huddle in a little group, and the temperature inside the huddle raises significantly, so they take turns to keep warm. So again, a fact that it's not really discussed in textbooks in school. We measured again whether their attitude had changed or not. The environmental moral dilemma in this case asked participants to imagine that they owned a fishing company and they decided to fish near the penguins' colonies because obviously there's a lot more fish there. But of course, that's the same food that the penguins eat, so if they fish it all, then the penguins are not going to have any food to eat. We asked them how much that is permissible on a scale of 1 to 3 in general, how much is okay to fish near the penguins, how much is it okay if everyone else does it, and how much it is okay if the penguins are endangered. For each of this question, we also asked why, because we really were interested in the justifications. So, next we move to the results. So, first we assessed whether participants' attitudes had changed significantly upon hearing the information provided. And if so, how? So we found that overall, at pre-test, everyone had very positive attitudes towards all animals. Younger kids, anecdotally, tended to be a little wary of bees, but in general, statistically, the attitudes were positive. For adults and older children, we did find a statistically significant difference in both taxonomic and idiosyncratic conditions. So attitude scores did increase, or were more positive upon hearing both type of information. No significant difference was found in attitude scores from pre to post test in either condition for younger children. And we'll talk about why that could be. Next, we looked at, we submitted the average scores of post-information attitudes into mixed ANOVA, and we actually split children into groups because we were looking for potentially developmental differences. These analyses did confirm the pattern that we found. There was a significant impact of both taxonomic and idiosyncratic information for adults and younger children. For adults and younger children, the scores were significantly higher in idiosyncratic condition over than taxonomic. For young children, it was quite a diverse trend. So these young children here, kids from 5 to 7.5, remain a little bit of a mystery. As far as the moral reasoning, we coded all the justifications according to a biocentric or anthropocentric thematic code. Again, biocentric refers to the moral standing of nature in and of itself. Anthropocentric as it relates to humans. And we found that the results overall tend to highlight a difference compared to the standing literature on moral reasoning, in the sense that all our participants tended to provide a significant number of biocentric justifications. However, the trend does reflect that of the developmental pattern, the developmental trajectory, whereas older participants tended to engage in more, younger children tended to engage in more anthropocentric reasoning, and older participants, older children and adults tended to participate in and engage in more biocentric reasoning. The fun fact here is that whereas for adults and children and older children, idiosyncratic information did have an impact, for younger children, biocentric reasoning was only promoted by taxonomic information. Then we considered all the answers in which participants displayed a positive attitudes. So we found that when we do that, younger children do show a higher rate of biocentric explanations when their attitudes are positive. And in particular, in the idiosyncratic condition, there was an interaction between attitudes and moral scores. So participants who displayed positive attitudes did score differently in terms of anthropocentric or biocentric reasoning, and participants with positive attitudes who received idiosyncratic information tended to show more biocentric scores. All of this to say that different types of information do impact attitudes differently, with some age differences. In particularly, we thought that a potential explanation as to why young children are not as impacted by idiosyncratic information is that they are steeped in it, right? We talked already earlier on about how they are exposed to anthropomorphic characters, pigs that dress as firefighters and Dalmatians that have crazy adventures. So idiosyncratic information might just not be novel for them. On the other hand, as far as moral reasoning, there is some support for the relevance of idiosyncratic information in adults and older children. Again, not for younger children, but there seems to be a link that still we need to explore between idiosyncratic information fostering positive attitudes, in turn fostering biocentric reasoning. Some limitations of the study: we don't have a control group. This was my dissertation study, and it started at time of pandemics. Lack of control group, virtual interviews. Our idiosyncratic information was positive or neutral at best. There were no dark facts about our animals. And overall, those animals were well liked. Thank you. I wanted to stop the penguins, but I don't know how to do that. Questions?